everyone. Thanks very much for coming. I'm Molly Starback, Director of the Office of Postdoctoral Services, and I'd like to welcome you to our first panel discussion in our series on the academic job search. And this series is co-sponsored by my office, by the Duke Career Center, and the Graduate School. Upcoming events in this series include the academic interview, negotiating the job offer, creating the teaching statement, managing the research budget, and the politics of academia. That should be a good one. For dates and times,
that'll be short.
I guess my hovering voice. For dates and times, please go to the Postdoc Services website, postdoc.duke.edu, or you can go to the Academic Job Search website itself. And today's discussion is on the initial search process, so CVs, cover letters, research statements, teaching statements. Many of you submitted your questions in advance. Thanks very much for doing that. So we will start with those and then open the floor to questions from you in the audience. And first and foremost, I would like to thank our panelists very much for taking time out of their super busy schedules to join us today. And our panelists are Patrick Charbonneau, who is Associate Professor of Chemistry, Physics, and Computational Biology and Bioinformatics.
Woo! You only have one. Where's English?
And we do have an alternate series for postdocs in humanities, so we've got those covered too. Douglas Marchuk, who is the Professor of Molecular Genetics and Microbiology.
Woo! Lighting things up this morning.
Amanda Randalls, Assistant Professor of Biomedical Engineering. And John Willis, Professor of Biology. So I'll ask our panelists to introduce themselves and briefly talk about how they've been involved in the faculty search process, either as fairly recent hires or now that they're on the other side of the table. And then we'll start with the questions that have been submitted online. So Patrick, would you like to start?
No, but I will. So hi, my name is Patrick Charbonneau. I'm a faculty in chemistry and physics. I've been at Duke since 2008. So I like to think of myself as a recently hired faculty who remembers very clearly what happened, but I guess it's less and less true. So I've been sitting on the other side of the hiring process now for 9 years. That's what that means more concretely. And this year is a bit special also because I'm the associate chair of my department, so I get to see more of the details of how it gets things set up. I've never actually worked in a hiring committee proper, but I've seen the work and followed closely what other colleagues have done for hirings over that period, which have included the hiring of about 6 or 7 faculty. So that's a bit my sample of what I've seen, including my own.
So I'm Doug Marchuk. I've been here for 24 years. I have chaired probably 6 or 7, or co-chaired or chaired 6 or 7 faculty searches, and we've probably hired more than a dozen people over the time. So it seems like we're always hiring somebody. So I think I know what we do. I don't know.
Yeah, so I'm Amanda Randalls. I've been here about 2.5 years, and I've been on 2 search committees already, so I'm kind of talk on both sides.
So I'm John Willis in biology. I've been here since 2000, and before that I was at University of Oregon for 8 years. So I've been on lots and lots of search committees, chaired or co-chaired a number of them. And so, yeah, I'm sort of in a similar position. I could barely remember mine. You can see the ball has indicated that I'm more on this side. So.
Could you give us an idea of how search committees are set up, what that process is like, maybe like how the search committee writes the job announcement, and how much attention should candidates pay to the job announcement? I know that they seem like they're either like really long and they want everything, including like, scuba diving certification or 3 sentences, and they want someone in biology.
So in this day and age, when you get to write the job announcement, it's actually really deep into the process already. Right? Departments have been arguing with the administration for probably 5 years, or 3 to 5 years, that they need to be hiring someone at that point. Right? So they've had to write strategic plans. They were reviewed by external boards. They've had to sort of gather some momentum, and then finally they're allowed to search. Right? They're given a hunting license or a permit to go and look for someone. And the committee is put together, and I've seen this sort of firsthand this year. The committee is put together, and in that interim, or in that period, there's lots of different constituencies in the department who are waiting to hire someone. Right? So you try to please them all by putting them in the same committee, and they all have different views or perspectives, not wildly different views, because we've agreed on this plan and we've argued that this plan was important, but you know, there's still some distinctions. So when you get to write the ad, it reflects that tension, right? And it may or may not make any sense as a result. Now, so if you try to be a purist, you read it and you're like, well, I don't understand. And then I have colleagues who say, well, if a word that relates to your field appears in the ad, you should apply. So, and you know, and it depends a bit where you feel in that zone of uncertainty. So, you know, for instance, and the colleague actually justifies it this way. The colleague says, if the person is really a go-getter, which is what we want, if people are really ambitious, they will read something into it and they want to put their CVs on our face. So whatever really we think, or whatever so if we create some ambiguity in how it's worded, then we're really just getting the best people. It's a theory. So the word theory appears, for instance. That's the word hypothesis. So, but it really depends, right? One thing you might not realize, and I think will emerge out of the conversation today, is that each department is different, each university is different, each search is different. And it's a mismatch, it's a match of the personalities that are involved in the search, and the committees, and the departments, and the universities that result in the vision or the formulating on how the process is understood. So, should you pay attention to what's written in the ad? Yes, if it targets you directly, go ahead. If you think it targets you indirectly, go ahead. If it doesn't target you, well, you can still go. But.
Other thoughts on that question?
I mean, I think one tension we often have in biology is whether we want to write a very broad general ad that will hopefully capture, you know, a broad range of people, and then we can select who we think is the best. That's the idealistic view of how it might happen. Whereas other people in the process may want to have a much more specific description with, you know, targeting particular subfields. And so, you know, sometimes you'll see a very broad, you know, we want a molecular biologist. And then it will often say, with interest in, and then it's like this random collection of unrelated topics. And that reflects like the 5 or 6 people who all have their own idea of who they want as a new colleague. So, you know, I totally agree. I think you should just apply to everything and don't obsess too much. But this also tells you that there's a great deal that's going on with the search committee about who they ultimately will select that may have nothing to do with you, right? You could be a very strong candidate, but you may not match the particular search image that the group of faculty on the search committee and the department as a whole have. So you may read the ad and think this is exactly me, and you don't get it, and you're hurt, and you're upset, and although you shouldn't, because it's just a crapshoot. So, you know, I think, yeah, I totally agree that these ads are written, and they're sort of come through several years of, yeah, crazy stuff.
Any other thoughts on that? Or?
For instance, in our case, so chemistry usually searches early, and the deans announced to the department at the end of August or the first week of September that we couldn't search. So the ad should have been posted 3 weeks before the time we were given the search. So we had 3 days to get everyone together and to find a committee and to get them to agree on wording. So yeah, when you read it, it doesn't make sense. But.
So given that a committee is made up of very different people, as you said, and that you have to sort through literally hundreds of applications for jobs these days, what is or are the most important pieces of the application? And I'm sure there's like a range too. Like we hear people say like, oh, I always read cover letters, I never read cover letters. You know, I look at references first. I only look at the CV, I only look at the publications. Can you talk about that? Like what you tend to focus on or what you see committees focusing on?
I mean, personally, I don't read cover letters very much. I might scan it, but you know, there's so much in each application that's meatier than that I tend to, you know, at least in the first pass. So, you know, realize that a search is a multi-stage process, and you first have this pile of 200 or 300 applications, and you kind of have to do triage to narrow, cut it in half, cut it into a third, you know, something like that. And so you basically want to, I think, as a first pass, focus on the publications, on the statement of the letters. And you would do a quick scan of all of that, and if it looked promising, put it in the thumbs up pile. And every member of the search committee would do that separately, and then we would meet and see where there's overlap in agreement, where there isn't, and sort of argue it through. But for the first pass, I really wouldn't pay, I personally don't pay much attention to the cover letter.
Okay, not having done it, I'm just going to speak about it from what I understand, is that there must be, each school and each committee works differently, right? It depends what they're looking for. If you're at a place, let's say a research one, a tier 1 place, then your research statements and your publication list and your letters from your research advisors are the most important aspect to look at. If you're in a liberal arts teaching oriented place, then it'll be completely different. So it, how the faculty or the community function reflects the culture and the aspirations of the department in which it's being created.
When the last search that I did, Beth Sullivan and I were the co-chairs, and we read, we were the only ones who read every application. I read from start to finish every piece of paper in the file. And Beth did, and we scored them separately, and then we met, and we said, hey, we agree on these, and da-da-da-da, and then anything that was like, whoa, we went 1 to 10, and 1 to 10, well, there's some discordance here, and we actually, but the point being is that we both agreed that the most important thing for us was the summary statement of the research.
Yeah.
And the reason is because if I read that and I'm not excited, if glip finds glap and glap finds blob, and then by the end of everything, I have no context, no science, no biology, nothing to. So we both thought that was the most important thing. I mean, obviously the curriculum data, the publications and stuff are important, but we wanted to see someone who, when they wrote about their research, we got excited, and it mattered what area they're in, but it's just like, wow, we would even say, wow, this seems really exciting, and I know that so-and-so who's on the committee would really like this based on the whole thing. So we went from like 120 to 30 or 40 that when we read them, we were like really excited. Then everyone read everything, including the letters and.
Yeah, so I know it kind of, I've had colleagues that said the first thing I'll do is go through and just look at the letters first. I think everybody has their thing they look at first. But definitely the research statement, we had a few in the last applications where there was one where we all agreed that we would fund this research statement, and she immediately got to the top, and everybody walked away loving her research statement. And that spoke to pretty much everybody on the board, which also showed we all had read it because we were able to discuss it, which was also positive. But I think it does definitely vary because when you do get 200 or 300 applications, I think some people would likely pick up the CV, see, do I want to spend the time to read the research statement? So yeah, it's kind of hard because they're all important, but it is I know there are some people that do go straight to the letters. Some people it kind of just varies, but it's tough too. But definitely make sure you're spending time, when you're preparing the letters, give the people who are writing your letters your CV ahead of time, tell them the story you're trying to tell, make sure they understand what your research statement's going to be so their letter matches. If you're, however you're pitching yourself, make sure they know what they're adding to your application, and just try to make sure everything is as strong as possible.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree that you want to see enthusiasm, passion, excitement, and promise in the research statements, the research summaries. And I think it's very easy to write those things in a passive way. Really, do not do passive writing. Talk about, why you're doing something in a very active voice. Think of your reader, your poor reader. You don't really pity your reader because they have a job and you don't, but they've got this huge electronic pile of applications, and they need to see something that will get their attention. And, so say why what you're doing is important. Say why it's got tremendous promise for a future research career. What the search committee is looking for is someone who will thrive, who knows what they're doing, knows why it's great, will take off, and their research program will go like that. Maybe like that, but certainly up and not flat. And so, to do that, you've got to be really into your work. You've got to explain why it's great to people who may not be experts in your field, and convey something about the future potential. Right away. A lot of people just focus on what they've done, but remember, we're hiring you to see what you're going to do in the future. So, yeah.
Thank you. And you mentioned like having to go through all these pages and pages and pages.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about like, what's overkill versus underkill in an application package? Like, for example, in a CV, we're taught that CVs are supposed to be everything you ever did back to when you won the 3rd grade spelling bee, right? And if you are a member of the American Society of Microbiology, that should be in there. Do you really feel that way, or do you think that people should be should edit a little bit more?
But CVs are organized in a way that you can, shoot right to the papers or whatever section you want. I think the other point is that if you give me a 20-page research statement, it's too long.
Forget it.
Yeah, and so I like to see something no more than 4 or 5 pages. I like to see just like in the grant proposal we were teaching in the grant writing class, a summary figure of what it is. But I like what John said. I want to see something that you got to tell me that this is really important stuff, and I'm going to be doing it for the next 20 years or whatever. And so it's got to be written in a way that, even if I'm not directly doing that research, I understand it, and I understand the reason why it's so important. So anyway, yeah.
Even
I think
if
the
it
CV,
seems...
you can put anything you want, but we write that, because you can partition it, but that summary statement's got to really catch you. It's just like a grant, like you said, you wanted to fund that person's research.
Yeah.
It's got to sound like this is the greatest thing I've ever read. Yeah.
And it's got to be compelling not just to the search committee, who may have a greater expertise in this particular field, but it's got to appeal to the entire department, because once we get down to a somewhat short list, the search committee will come to the department and say, here's our top 10 or 8, and we would really like to bring in these 5 people. But at that point, the whole department will look at the applications, and if it's dull as dishwater to most of the department, they're just not going to be enthusiastic. So yeah, you have to generate enthusiasm, and that enthusiasm, of course, ultimately has to come from yourself and your own perception of why what you're doing is the bee's knees.
So definitely talk to the different departments. Like, different fields have different ideas of how long the research statement should be. So I know, because I applied broadly from computer science to biomedical engineering, and some departments told me they wanted a 6 to 10 page research statement. Some wanted a 2-page research statement. So I couldn't send the same research statement to all of the different departments. It's worth kind of being aware. Because had I sent the 10-page one to the 2-page guys, they would not have read it. And I'd also on the CV, I've never heard an argument for somebody to get into the pool of who we talk to based on they were or they were not a member of a certain society. Things like that. It's nice to put on, but I've never heard that even come up of well, they should have been in the IEEE and they weren't. So it's nice to put there, but as long as it's nicely organized, we can skip over it. I don't think it's going. That kind of thing isn't going to argue. They care about publications, your job history, and that kind of stuff. Make sure you're putting awards and things like that. And then when you're doing your research statement, like you mentioned, it's okay to put pictures. Pictures are good.
Yeah, they're great.
I think a lot of people want to just fill it with text.
No.
John does not read.
No. I I mean, think, when was the last time you read 300 big, long, 5-page research summaries that were all text?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just human, right? You got a lot of other stuff going on. You gotta.
And I think in mine, one of my third sentences was literally I'm passionate about X, and just was very explicit and put it out there. This is what excites me. Hopefully it excites you as well. Just explicitly put it in of this is what's driving me, and then continue to talk about the problems.
You are the upper bound on excitement. So what I tell my students when they learn to give talks, right? If you're not excited about what you're presenting, no one in the room will be more excited than you.
Exactly.
So if you write a research proposal in which you're not excited about the work you're going to do, no one who's going to read it is going to be more excited than you were anyway. So it's just impossible. So, but excitement is not about superlatives.
No.
Right? This is not what we're talking about. This is not the first degree excitement. It's really, about.
There's more than woohoo to it.
Yeah.
So
Make sure you understand what's exciting about your work.
Yeah, and that you have something there.
But I think what John also said is really important, and that is that they're not hiring you for. I mean, we're judging you on what you did in the past, but they're hiring you for the future. So you really have to. I mean, a lot of people will put a really extensive, maybe half of that document will be what they plan on doing for the future. You could even see, they don't have to write it as this is my first grant will be, although some people have done that. And
Yeah.
and that shows someone who's thinking that at least, here I have 3 lines of investigation in the future, and I see them all as being 3 different grants, maybe not all at once, da-da-da-da. And really sensitive, because they're hiring you for
Yeah.
the future.
I mean, if you get an interview, one of the very first questions they'll ask you is, what are your first grant applications going to be like? What do you see as your most promising material where you've got enough preliminary data that it's going to be your #1, while you're doing other stuff to get enough data for #2 or whatever.
Right.
So, yeah, don't just summarize your past work.
So for those of you who have been doing this for a couple of decades, have you noticed a change in what's the expectations of what a research statement should be over that time? Or it's always been?
I think it's always been that way. I think. Well, I think that, I've only been at, Research One universities where they want to have very strong research programs. And so that's what the focus has always been, I think.
Yeah, but the aspect, weaving in the immediacy of funding.
Well, you wouldn't have to say my first grant, but you would say my first priority would be this project. This will be what is my meat and potatoes, or my beans and rice, or whatever, my lentils. It will be what you're going to go after first. And then these are really promising secondary projects that I hope eventually to be a major part of my research program. You can use the term research program. That's something that administrators and search committee chairs understand. Yeah.
So one thing that postdocs and students obsess over, as you know, are publications. Do I have enough? Are they good enough? Can you talk a little bit about that? When do we know we're ready to apply in terms of publications?
No publications, don't apply. There's nothing to go on.
Yeah.
It sounds crazy, but yeah. I mean, we've had people in the pool who say, I've got this really cool story, but, maybe sometimes they'll even give you not a preprint because it's not published yet, but like a Word document. I don't know how to judge it. You're not ready. Beth and I had this long discussion about this. That's why we read the research statements first before the CD, because we didn't want to get biased. They don't have a Nature paper, therefore, that we said, wow, this is really exciting science. Let's see what they've done with that. But it was true that people who wrote the good stuff had Nature paper. Or maybe not Nature, but they had 1 or 2 really good publications. They didn't need 50, but they needed 1 or 2 really good ones. What we often look for is a person who's shown that they've gotten a couple papers or more. By the time you're applying, you're at the end of your postdoc, you've had 4 or 5 years as a grad student and as a postdoc. We like to see people who've been successful multiple times. Because if you've only been successful once and then your PhD, or vice versa, you start to wonder, was that the advisor was really more dependent on the PI than the student or postdoc. So we like to see success. And again, it doesn't mean all nature and science, but wow, they got 2 or 3 first author papers and I can really see a body of work here. And then I see again a body of work. They were able to take something and move it. That's what you have to do.
You have to demonstrate, so you're writing this exciting new science that you want to be doing. And one of the important ways in which that science will be communicated through the work is, through the world, is through the publications you'll make. In a sense, your path leading up to that point should demonstrate that you're capable of transforming these great ideas and these great research projects into communications that the world likes to read and likes to receive, right? So that's what it should reveal. That may be, that's obviously very field dependent, what that means, whether it's a physical review letters or it's a nature journal or a few really solid long form papers. It really depends on what's the topic. But it should be coherent with what you're proposing to do. Right? If you have never been successful at publishing your work, or barely so, and then you're proposing all this amazing work, there will be a cognitive disconnect. Right? In a sense, to get back to how we started on this topic, like what you look at first. The basic assumption that the committee is making, in the sense that a great file will have great everything. So where I start does not really matter. It's a question of choice. Right? And at the end, once you start looking more into depth, the entire thing should look great, right? So if you have a great research statement, you should have great publications, you should have great letters of recommendation, and these will work. And then you can choose, as a committee member, where you start probing, what you feel most excited about, or what you think is the best proxy. But at the end, once the committee gets together, different viewpoints and the files get looked at in detail, it should all mesh well, right? Then, in a sense, the excitement, so what you were saying, the excitement about the research project often reflected what the publication record had been in the past. But this is what a coherent file is, and they should. The departments wants to see that you can get money, or that you will be able to raise funds and recruit students, right? Because you have to recruit students by being excited and by being exciting in your research, and then you have to get money by convincing your colleagues to give you, like that what you're about to do is exciting and important, and then you have to publish this work, and then you also have to convince your colleagues to think that this work is important and exciting, right? So that's the theme throughout, and that's what must emerge of the body of the file.
Easy, right?
Doesn't sound very easy.
So,
It's not. It's not.
So how important is it nowadays to have a history of grant funding? We hear like, unless you have an F-32 or an NSF individual fellowship, you're not going to make the cut. What do y'all think about that?
I think people who have shown their ability to write some type of proposal and get it funded, that's a little bit of a leg up. I don't think you'd have to come with the R01 or that kind of grant, but to have shown that maybe as a grad student you got a grant, and I think that's really helpful. I do look at that because that's what what do we do with our time? We write grants. I mean, and in fact, that's what we do. Because we don't, the papers now, the people in my lab write the first draft, but I write grants. That's not a professional panhandler.
That's right.
So even fellowships, like it doesn't have to be like,
Yeah.
different things. Like the NSF fellowship as a grad student, I think anything
that you've done,
you can convince people to support your research, or like postdoc fellowships, all that helps. Maybe we've definitely hired people that didn't have that kind of thing, or didn't come in with funding. Like it's not required, but it's helpful.
I think we teach our first semester grad students to write a proposal, right? So, and there's a 4th year exam on the proposal they have to write. And you know, we're weaving into the training of graduate students and postdocs more and more. So I think that reflects what we think is an important skill for someone to have. Do you need to have funding? Absolutely not. Right? In some fields more than others, right? If you intend to be funded by NIH, there's many more opportunities for transitional grants from postdocs to faculty. If you're in a more basic sciences, on the arts and science side, you're unlikely to have that sort of opportunity. So, but you should demonstrate that you've been able to write and get people excited about your work, right? And it could be small fellowships, it could be larger postdoctoral fellowships from different area. Everything helps. But you're trying to give the message that you can do it. It's not that you come in with money. It's not that it's that you have that skill and you're capable of expressing it.
I just want to make one point, and that is that if you're a foreigner, there are many fewer opportunities, and I think the committee will realize that.
Yeah.
But like if you were United States citizen all along and I think other people would look better if they had a pre-doctoral, some kind of fellowship. It doesn't have to be from NIH, and then society, whatever, and then, yeah. But I can think of somebody who we recently hired who was foreign. I don't think had any track record of funding, but it would have been really hard for him.
I mean, even beyond funding, right? Or for specific research, you can get travel grants to attend some conferences.
Yeah, exactly.
You can write a proposal for a session at your national meeting, right? There's all sorts of ways in which you can demonstrate that you can organize and put something together coherent and exciting that your peers will like. That's a hint that will work. And you could do that as, at the American Society, for instance, anyone can do it. Right? Program chair this year, and I receive those proposals, and I'm the one judging them. And I'm sure people who do this as postdocs or junior faculty get some credit for being able to pull this together. And you're more than capable.
So any questions from the audience at this point?
I have two questions. The first one is how many publications are sufficient? Because when I finished my PhD at first, the numbers were different. Then when I wrote my first grant, they were looking for 10, 17. Now it's more than 20 for an R1. That was one of the comments. And then for some other reviewers, it doesn't matter. The other question is when I started my postdoc at Duke, I was with the clinical department, and I was told I cannot apply for any, and I will not be offered any faculty positions at Duke, even though I had really good backup. I don't have my own grants, like a K99 or something. But my friends who graduated with me come from the same universities were able, both of them, to get really good faculty positions in lower tier universities, but without having any funding. So I just stopped applying for faculty positions because I thought, well, if I don't have a K99 or if I don't have an R or something, I cannot get anything.
How long have you been out? Give me the timeline, because that might be affecting that.
When I started, when I thought about applying for the faculty positions, it was my 4th year.
So I'll make a few comments about number of publications, because people who go up for tenure ask the same question, right? You always think it's a matter of how many papers do I have, is this enough? And it's never quantified that way. Right? There needs to be some papers, right? As I said, as I was arguing, right? Or as we were arguing, you need to have some impact on your field. But it's really how many publications it takes for you to carry through your story, for the work to come out. And that depends on the field you're in. It could be a really heavy math paper, or it could be a series of small publications that sum up to something big, to something bigger, right? There's not one recipe. It should, and that's true at tenure time, but it's also true when you're applying for faculty position, right? Your publication record should reflect that you're capable of producing scholarly work in your field that's of the impact and quality that you're proposing to do in your research statements. And this needs to be roughly coherent. If you've published one small, low-impact paper and your research statement says, well, I'm going to be producing work that the reviewers think or that you're sort of insinuating should become nature material, well, how do we know that you can write such papers? That you know how, that you know how to generate the results and the ideas necessary to pull it together. So that there should be some coherence in that level, and that's what you need. And
I guess I would just say one other just quick comment is that if I were you, I would ignore the advice of people who say, oh, you shouldn't bother applying because of X, Y, or Z. You don't have enough papers, you don't have enough, you don't have your own money, whatever. It's your life, right? And you know, there's not much cost to it, and potentially great reward. And so why hold yourself back based on what some random person said to you about their view of the field? They're not going to be the ones that are going to be evaluating your applications. They may be very familiar with Duke's thing, but you know, who's to say about other places? And so I guess there's no, you know, if you feel like you don't have enough publications, I mean, what's the harm in putting together the research statement and giving it a shot? You at least have started on it, and maybe next year you'll be in a stronger position, and you will have already seen, like, you know, maybe you've gotten feedback from your letter writers on your statements or whatever. So I don't really think that there's a huge cost to applying, and I think, yeah.
What about someone who has done multiple postdocs, or they've been in the postdoc position for more than 4 years, 5 years? Sometimes we see people who do 2 postdocs, like for whatever reason, one doesn't work out. Sometimes it's because they, you know, it happens, people get bad mentors who are tormentors.
Right.
And so what can a postdoc or graduate student do to overcome that? Like, they don't have any publications because it's not their fault, or they've been doing it longer than they should have.
Letters, and maybe that's something where you want to put something in a cover letter to explain your narrative, but also have your letter writers explain it for you and say, you know, I'm worried about this because, as you know, that was a disastrous idea going to that lab, and you know, I didn't get anything done through no fault of my own, but you know, but even more generally, it's very common for people to do more than one postdoc. So that's, you know, not an alarm bell to me, I don't think, unless it's gone on for decades. You know, but in many ways you may be finding your own path, and the first postdoc may have given you training in something that you may ultimately use in a different system that you did in your second postdoc, and now the second postdoc is going to be the basis for your future career, but you'll use the stuff in your first, and the knowledge that you gained or experience. And so weave that into your personal narrative too. I mean, remember, this research statement is a story. It's not a set of facts, and so you can explain that with some language, again, in first person in the research statement, and say, explain why you went and did this postdoc and then you switched and did this postdoc. You know, that's, I think, perfectly good.
It's like focus on the skills that you picked up in each postdoc. And like, because we don't want to hire someone who's like directly competing with their initial advisor. Like, we're not trying to get a replica of like your graduate advisor. You're usually going to your postdoc to get a different kind of experience that's going to be brought to the graduate program. And if you're like, you know, going into something completely different, it might take 3 or 4 years to build the skill set that you needed that was different than your PhD. And I think we've seen a few applications where we were very positive about that. Like, look, they knew what they were doing. They wanted to attack this one problem that needed these 2 very different skill sets, and they went and got them. Like, that actually was having a longer postdoc where we knew they had that skill set was very positive. So just kind of explaining, why did I do this? Even if you didn't get papers, and it was more like I was training in the lab to learn how to do these techniques, that's great. Like, just kind of get across, like, what are the skills, why did you do this? And kind of connect, like, yeah, why did you pick each position and what are the skills you got out of it? And I think that it's not really a negative. Like, we've definitely hired a lot of people that have had longer term postdocs or multiple postdocs, as long as they explained why. And if it looked like they had a direction and they were driven, it speaks better to your long-term plan.
The number of postdocs you make is often a reflection of the job market in your field. The number of people who had 2 postdocs who we hired after 2008 was vastly larger than the number of people we hired into postdocs before 2008.
Yeah.
Right, because the funding and the structure of the department and the field completely changed in 2008, 2008. So it may change again, right? It's under pressure from the job market as well. If you're in a field that Google and Facebook hires, and then you might not do any postdoc, right? And you might sign the offer letter and never show up either, right? So it very varies broadly across departments. But I can tell in my field, in my subfield, people who do 2 postdocs is now, or a longer postdoc. People used to do a year and a half, 2 years, and postdocs and get hired, and now it's not uncommon and actually almost expected that people will do 5 years. It's really a market-based or market result or governmental-induced market changes to the market. So where you're going to see that.
Yes.
Based on your own experiences with hiring committees, do you have impressions about why women and minorities tend to be underrepresented in faculties?
I could say this, every year we have to, I've done so many of these, we're pretty sure we know who women or men are, but, academic jobs online doesn't let you know who's a minority. So they asked us once, how many minority candidates were in the applicant pool, and we were like, I don't know. But then we found out that the HR person could get in there and find that out. So I don't, we've done, our department's done pretty well at hiring women, but we've done pretty poorly at hiring minorities. But it's hard to target. I don't even know who's in the pool, just by reading a thing.
I would say that, certainly there is implicit bias that we're constantly trying to fight against. And so, I can't think of any one particular search where it was obvious that there was discrimination or whatever. But, certainly that's a possibility that, we all go to training, we all go to, sort of rethink the way we evaluate things. In the most recent search in our department, we completely redacted the names, for example. And that was a very successful search. And I don't know that we were any more successful in getting to the short list women and minorities, although we did have some of both. But I think that as a department, at least, we're exploring ways at which we can be proactive in fighting whatever implicit bias we may have. And I think this is true, not just at the job market, right? It's all along the way. And so, when I teach undergrads, I'm very aware, I teach, like 400 undergrads. I'm very aware that a lot of the folks in my class come from backgrounds that are different from like a prep school in New England where people have had a bazillion AP credits. And so trying to start at the very beginning, make the science accessible to everyone regardless of their background and build in support so that people can become comfortable with fields that maybe in their family backgrounds they're not familiar with. And so I think there's a lot to be done at all levels to encourage folks to go into fields that they may feel that they don't go into in the first place for whatever reason.
So if you want to narrow it really just at the stage of faculty hiring, right? That particular stage, there's enormous amounts of incentive to identify people who are with non-traditional backgrounds for faculty, so or underrepresented minorities in a field, which should be women or various ethnic groups chosen.
Mm-hmm. Just explain what those are. So oftentimes we can,
it depends on the field.
It depends on the field, but oftentimes the provost, for example, has funding to hire underrepresented folks in science and math fields, right? So if we can identify promising candidates that somehow we have some knowledge about, however, then we could go to the provost and maybe get an extra faculty line for the department. or have extra funding for start. So there's the administration, at least here at Duke, is trying to build in incentives to really be proactive about that in the job search. And so I think that's really good. Sally Kornbluth has been very positive about that.
And a lot of schools are doing the same and trying. I mean, there's a competition to try to identify those candidates. So there's really a lot of pressure, in a sense, to do it. But the pipeline is also a big issue. There was a search a couple of years in physics. Oh, sorry, the department I shall not name, where there was 150 applicants and one woman. One. They interviewed her, and she went elsewhere. Right? But so we do our best, and that's what I was trying to say, is that there's a lot of incentives for us to succeed in bringing those. But if they're not there, that's why we're working at different levels. That's why we go to career fair for undergraduate students. That's why we do outreach in museums, and because we realize that our mandate as faculty is broader than just this, but just this particular stage. I think, at least in my department, and I like to think everywhere I Duke and more broadly, we do everything we can. We think.
But it falls off. I mean, you just look at the proportion of different groups in the undergraduate incoming class here at Duke, right? It does not reflect the population as a whole. And if you look at the same for graduate school, it's even further reduced. And if you look at going into postdocs, it's even further distorted from the basic frequencies of these groups in the population as a whole. So it's a huge problem, and I don't think any of us have the solution. But
it is people recognize it's a problem, they're working on it, and it's definitely a discussion, which is nice. But I've seen in some of the committees that we propose a group of people to bring an interview, and there's no female in there. That'll be a question of why isn't there one? What was the reason? And it's at least there's an active we're trying to fix it. And I think most schools, it's at least a discussion in most of the programs.
Yeah. So for example, in the search that we did that I mentioned, where we had the names redacted. Also, the deans, Valerie Ashby, for example, and Dan Keyhart, wanted to see the list of the top 20 or 30 names and then see what our interview list was. And they had the power to say, oh, why didn't you pick this person for an interview? And so they were very, very active, proactive in ensuring that we were having as representative a group as possible, but it's not perfect.
It's both the carrot and the stick, right? At least at the dean's level.
Yeah.
You have to, if you don't do it, you have to report and explain why you did. You have to justify it in individual cases as well, not just why those people were great, but why did you choose?
Yeah, I hate to get off an important topic like that, but I have a question about the startup funding. How much does that play into the decision of to whom you make offer letters to? For instance, you have someone who maybe just needs some setup for electrolysis, whereas you might have someone who's going to come in and do some groundbreaking thermodynamics research. And so there's startup funding that involves thermodynamics and spectroscopy, and then they need a little benchtop XRD for rapid analysis of a lot of phases in the synthesized. The startup package might be somewhere around $300,000. So, I mean, how do you decide? Does that go into the decision?
I've never seen that happen once in 24 years.
Really?
And we, like I said, we've hired at least a dozen. So
But this is Duke.
Yeah.
Yeah, Duke is deep
You're like,
pockets.
great.
They never have any money until when they want to, and then they find it.
The committee decides who they want, and then it's the chair's problem to figure out who they
Yeah,
want.
committee has nothing to do with startup. They don't want to see anything. So yeah, it's only once you've risen to the top and you are the candidate of interest, you are the one, then that's when you start, then the chair will ask you, well, what do you need for your startup? We really would like to make this work, so please tell us what you need and we'll do our best. And then there's all these negotiations with the dean, see if they can get pockets of money from other places.
But it could be very, very different than other schools.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So we have a facility already in place and your research plugs in directly into this facility and we don't need to buy anything,
Yeah.
that could be a big factor. And actually, on a larger scale, also Duke does this, right? They may not argue over 100K, but if you need a new genome sequencing and you fit into, you know, where the money has been poured for a number of years, then you say, well, that's great. You will programmatically and, you know, instrumentally fit within what we're building.
But that's
But
always
orders of
after
magnitude.
the search committee and the department has decided who they want, or rank them in that order.
And let me point out that we're going to have a panel just on negotiating coming up on November 3rd, so that might be a good one to come back to. So another question about like maybe what you should bring up at first, or keep your cards closer to your deck. What if you have a partner or a spouse? Do you put that in the cover letter, or do you wait until you have the interview to say, by the way?
I wouldn't put it in the application. I've never seen that in the application.
I have, but it's rare.
Yeah, and it's
It
uncomfortable.
depends. Yeah.
Because really, it should be blind. You should
Yeah.
just be, yeah, and if those, yeah.
I say like when I did my job search, I wasn't going to go somewhere my husband couldn't get a job, and it was definitely like that was going to be our deciding factor. If it's that, you have to decide what is your deciding factor. Is it going to be your startup funds? Is it going to be whatever? Like I brought it up on my interview just because it was such like that was a thing for us. But I don't think it's necessary, and it's something like wait till the second interview, wait till you have like you do not in any way have to bring that up early, and I wouldn't put it in the application. I don't think.
Yeah.
I mean, if the place you're applying to does no opportunity for your partner and that's a deal breaker, don't apply, right?
Right.
But you might not know that until, you know.
Sure, but you have an idea.
Anyway, suppose it's highly unlikely. You apply to this place, you are the one, so you're the candidate of interest, and then you bring it up. Well, maybe it's bloody obvious to you that there wouldn't be a good match for your significant other at that place, but if you get the offer and you're the one, that's perhaps some leverage that you can use at a place where they get an offer, and then they say, look, my spouse is really awesome and guy has an offer over here, and you know, you can do some of that playing off. So I don't see a huge advantage to saying it.
You just don't want to wait like.
No, you don't want.
You don't want to wait too. Like we did things like when I got the offer from Duke, I mentioned like my husband, and like Duke flew him out. They set up informational interviews. Like they want to like really help to try to get things to happen. But you needed to give them that time. It couldn't be like, well, I have to respond to my offer tomorrow, and by the way, please help find my husband a job. And like, so it's kind of just depending on how important it is to you, and if it is going to be the deal breaker, you need to give them the time to find something and help you with it. But they, like I think every school I worked with, they were like on like the partner thing was a big deal on my end, and like they were phenomenal. Like it was like they flew my husband out here without me coming. Like I didn't even come that weekend. They set up interviews for him. Like they really will do as much as they can to try to help you, because also, like as you kind of mentioned, it took years to get to the point where they picked you, and they don't want to have to go through that again. So like they will try to work with you.
Yeah. And I think also, you know, telling them early on, once it's clear that you are the top candidate, means that if it's very clear they can't do anything, then they can move on to the next candidate. So you're not screwing up, you know, this multi-year process with a failed search.
That's why I've always appreciated it when they brought it up. I mean, if the way I look at it, if there were like 150 applicants or 200 or 300 and you got it down to 5 and you come for the interview, you know, I'm always in the, you know, when they leave, we're like, do they have a, you know, we're always asking that question. So if they say, well, you know, you can't ask, of course, and I never do. But if they bring it up, then I say, oh, what do they do? You know, like, so I'm actually appreciative of that honesty, because, as you point out, Duke bends over backwards to try to help. That doesn't mean that it works, but they bend over backwards to try to find something. Even
unlike Harvard.
So, yeah,
Harvard is a terrible place. Stay away.
I told every institution I was interviewing with when I got to the second round, and I think I got most of this off. Like I wouldn't say, it was never a negative thing. I don't think it was held against me, and it was always like they all started working with me and were very positive. But I wouldn't necessarily bring it up like, day one. You want them to like fall in love with what you're doing, want you, and then want to help you.
Yeah, that's right.
Other questions?
I was expecting a fishing analogy.
So one question that we get a lot is, so all the ads say, we expect you to be collaborative. We expect you to collaborate with other people at the university. Da, 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 da. do you name specific people? Do you say like, well, I want to collaborate with Dr. Willis because he's so much fun? Well, what if Dr. Willis is like, I know. Well,
Yeah. Likely to happen. I think that's really good to put, I mean, I think you could put it into your research statement if you wanted to tailor your research statement to a particular place. But when I was applying, I was so lazy, I just had the same application, I just sent it out, you know, in mass mailings. But certainly if you're interviewing, you want to say how excited you are about the possibility of coming to this place, and boy, wouldn't it be awesome if we interacted, and I could see interacting over here and over here. And so that just shows the committee that, yeah, this could be a really good fit, a great colleague, that not someone who would just be isolated off in their own lab and we wouldn't benefit from their knowledge and vice versa.
So it's worth looking at the faculty lists and saying that. See, that's where I would put it in the cover letter.
Yeah,
so that
if
you
wanted
don't have to
do
rewrite that 5-page or 10-page.
My cover letter was always, enclosed, please find my application.
Which is why he doesn't read that.
But I do think it is a good idea at one point or other to look at who's there and you know, seek out things.
But make sure it's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, there's nothing, I mean, on a different scale, right? We can all laugh about this, but when grad students apply for grad school, they sometimes name drop. Right? Say, I want to work with so-so and so. It's like, well, it turns out so-so and so have not been research active for 20 years, and they don't have any funding. So why do you think you're going to be, you're not going to do this, right? You're much more savvier and wiser, and you understand how this works. But if you want to collaborate with, I don't know, some real examples, like, oh, I want to come to this school because it would be great to have a research program with this person. Well, this person does not collaborate with anyone. It's well known. So if you just find some commonality in topic and you think there's ways for synergy to emerge, make sure this makes sense, because if the committee receives a package and sees, oh, you want to work with so-and-so, well, good luck. Go look elsewhere. Clearly you didn't think about it. So you can do it, and if it's genuine, it's correct, but take it seriously. And if you don't think, if you are not taking it seriously, don't do it. I think you could be hurt more when you get to that scale than if you...
yes.
Can you say anything about the actual interview and the job talk and like how you're evaluating people?
The next round.
Yeah, that's the next step. That will be coming up, and the whole thing's going to be devoted to that.
We haven't prepared yet for that.
Yes.
I have two questions that's related both to the financial and the people in the department. Actually, one of the schools that I'm applying has asked for a detailed list of startup items. So I don't know how to approach that. And
Ahead of time?
yes,
Yeah.
in the application.
Even
package.
before,
That's
with your
serious.
application.
That's
with the
up.
application,
Yep.
Yes.
not the due.
No, it's not Duke. Yeah, it's like
No, but you're not going up for an interview yet.
no.
So
This is
just
just
get
part of the
initial
application.
application.
So that was one question: that how much detail.
Weird.
You're
I've
breathing in
never
money, that's why you
I've
don't
never
remember.
heard that.
So I've seen this.
You have?
Yes.
So it is real, we can believe
Yeah,
it.
it's
Yeah.
real, absolutely.
I applied one last week that did the same thing.
And then
It's a
this,
smaller college.
and then the second question is, so the research statement probably has to be referenced to show the context of your work and what has been done before. But I'm a little bit like panicking over whether like I've sent this to multiple places and whether someone would think, oh, why this paper of mine is not cited. You know, something like this. Is this important, or is it you really have to go for like the best, what is really critical at pioneering, paper in that?
You mean like you have a big literature cited section?
Well, I just have the background. So everything that I wrote, I divided into like two small sections. Each section has like a little background and then my actual approach. In the background section, there is some references to like what's been done, what's been known, blah blah blah, and I also don't know if it's like it's not heavily cited. It's not how I will cite my actual paper, the background of my paper. but it still has citation, and I don't know if I have to like look around and like make sure.
I think that's fine. I would say this though, and this is the same advice we give in the grant writing class. Like in the NIH study sections, you can look and see who was on the study section for the last 3 cycles. You wouldn't want not to cite someone who could have been cited who was on the study section. So the same thing, that may be a place where you would tailor it. It'd be very infrequently, but if you were applying to somewhere and there was somebody who was a big shot, you know, you could say they think that, you know, you're doing that on purpose and everything, but what's worse, to flatter them or to...
Yeah.
I mean, I wonder if you, so I guess my inclination would not include a lot of citations at all.
No, yeah,
like,
of course.
I think you don't need to put any, frankly, because it's written as a, you know, it should be very clear that you're deeply aware of the field itself from the way you write, and you don't need to prove that if it's written in a compelling way where you've got, clearly have mastery over the field. You don't need to reinforce that with a literature cited section, I don't think. I mean, it should be pretty obvious from your writing that you know what's going on. Maybe a few, but I don't know. What do you guys think?
It should be short.
Very
I mean,
short.
so you could be citing your own
it's
work,
not a
for
re-
instance.
Definitely cite your own.
Yeah,
exactly. But
as the background, as you were highlighting.
Yeah.
And if there's, you know, if for instance, if you're writing a proposal that may fall outside of the traditional boundaries of what you think the committee will be looking to say, then you say, well, okay, maybe cite the biggest review recent that explains, that would be sustained, but you know, it should definitely be of the order of 10 at most.
Yeah. How many? I don't know.
And then if you're writing, well, whatever. I mean, different opinions, but I would treat it like it's not an it's not a scholarly review of the literature.
Not at all.
It's your research summary. So cite as many papers as you need to do. But don't fuss over. But I would not insult
cite
somebody.
someone.
It's not meant to be an indication of your literary prowess, or the number of papers you've read.
Yeah.
Or
Well,
anything like that.
Yeah. But it is rather odd to be asking for a list in the application, I think. But maybe that's a lower. Maybe it says something about how much funding they.
Yeah, it's a direct reflection of the wealth of the school, right? You don't see this at Duke. Duke doesn't request it because they think they can pay for whatever is needed. But if your research, you should write in that statement what you think you need to be successful in your research. And if you're applying to a school that has very limited resources, your research statement should be tailored to that context, and therefore you will match the estimated budget that they have in mind. If you propose the same research proposal, set of proposals at Duke or Harvard as you would in a small liberal arts college, then you're the fool. Right? Then if you sum up to $1 million of equipment, they'll be like, okay, thank you. So that's how it should be. And in a sense, if really money is a constraint, you should try to be creative as to what you could do research-wise to still have an impact, but with resources that aren't really constrained.
They may also be wanting to see if anything's on the list that they have that they can cobble together that they have. I think that a lot of times they'll say, well, there's more of a community feel toward the equipment, so they may be saying, oh, good, check, we've got that, check, we've got that, so we don't have to pay for that.
When I was interviewing at smaller places, I grow thousands of plants in greenhouses and growth chambers and stuff. And so I remember, going to smaller places that didn't really have a greenhouse it looked like a high school greenhouse with the roof caving in and stuff. That was a big issue because for them to build adequate resources for growing my organisms would have been sort of more than they could handle. And so some of them I know did want to know that up front. Did I really need a big fancy greenhouse? So.
One thing that we haven't brought up that a lot of postdocs really tie themselves in knots about is the teaching statement, because a lot of postdocs really haven't done any teaching. So do you have any thoughts on that? We usually say keep it to a page, especially if you haven't done any teaching. Do you read that class at all?
It's also like if you haven't done a lot of teaching, like I know one of my friends did like a lot of outreach talks, and she had videos of like the talks she gave, and like some of the schools that had hired her or made offers actually did go out and watch the talks that were online. And so she had provided links on her CV of like, this is where, like, this is a talk I had given at this big event. And like, she actually got feedback on the interview that they had actually gone and watched the talk. So they wanted to make sure she could teach and like that she could convey the information. And having things like that kind of supplemented the fact that she didn't actually have an experience teaching. And she got positions at like top R1 institutions. And then I know that like at Duke, we take it seriously. Maybe, I don't know, research might be a higher. But we did like it, like I've seen it where if you can mention like these are the classes that are core curriculum classes in your program that I would actually teach, and tailoring it to the institution helped a lot. Like even if you do that when you come for the interview, like mentioning I would teach X, Y, and Z, and like show that you've looked at the program, you know what they're actually, what do they see this department as, how do you fit in, and that kind of thing was helpful.
Also, I think you could speak to, I really agree with that sort of outreach and using that to indicate a level of passion and experience in teaching. So if you, whatever your personal, if you've done outreach to high schools or elementary schools or had mentored high school students in your lab, or if you really had important teachers when you were in college or in high school, particularly if you could speak to your enthusiasm and passion for teaching at all levels, from introductory courses in the first year to advanced, graduate classes, and tie that to your own personal experiences and what was meaningful to you and how that will shape the way you teach. What you find most compelling about great teachers, why are they successful, and say, but keep it personal and say, this is the way I want to be as a teacher, and this is what I value and want to bring to my students. So
you can also interpret it a bit broadly and make it a statement of teaching and mentoring.
Yeah.
If you've been working with undergraduate students in the lab, written papers with them, if you've worked with grad students, that's also a form of teaching that's valued in both actually in a liberal arts small college and in a research one university, because they want to know that you're capable not only of teaching in front of a classroom, but of mentoring people into a research world. So if you have experienced that, you can also.
And if you've given research talks to huge crowds and you were fairly comfortable doing that, I mean, that's a personal experience, and you could say, I've done a number of talks, I'm very comfortable working in front of large groups, I'd be happy to teach intro classes. I don't know. If you don't have any other experience, draw on whatever you can to make it a personal, compelling statement. But we mainly look at the research.
We don't even have a teaching statement in our application.
Yeah, because they're not there at the med center, so.
Other questions? If not, we have a few minutes late, so perhaps we can break a little bit early and you can ask the panelists your personal questions. If you, we got one more.
I have one question. Some people come from really strong schools. I mean, PhD from Harvard or MIT. Some people come from international, universities from Europe. And so how does the name of the school matter for applicant?
Pedigree.
Sorry for this.
To me, the pedigree matters more in the lab than the school. So I don't ever think we've ever looked and saw, oh, this person's from Harvard, whoop-de-doo, but if we saw, oh, they were, someone on the committee would say, I know so-and-so's lab. And, at least at a place like Duke, it's pretty international, so they would know the big names. People who are doing the interesting work at probably anywhere. So I don't think we care so much about, but we do care about the pedigree is your PhD advisor, your postdoc advisor. Not so much the school.
Your publications.
And of course, that's the other thing, because it doesn't matter if you've got a good paper. In fact, it's a lot stronger if you've come out of a backwater lab and published really strong papers. It's clear loose. It must have a lot to do with you. So I wouldn't worry about that. But
that brings up another question that I've been asked more frequently. Does networking play any part in this? Like if you go up and meet somebody at a meeting, or does that play a role? Or not if you're doing a needs blind one or a name blind?
I think definitely, it depends on the school, depends how it works, but I know like I really wanted to get an offer at BME at Duke, so when I went to the Biomedical Engineering Society, I met with every single faculty that happened to be at BMES from Duke to make sure they knew who I was.
And then alumni as well.
I went to Duke undergrad, I really wanted to come back and I wanted to be at BME. And so like
That's amazing.
And
it worked.
They were all there, and like you don't know who's on the committee, but I would imagine it helped. It's not like you have to go to that extent, but like I think if there's somewhere you really want to be, like I would definitely reach out. It's helpful if someone, like I know when they had my first step, when my application first came in, one of the faculty members like mentioned it to people on the committee to make sure they watched out for it because I had talked to him. And so, like, it does help to get people to at least look at your application. Like, obviously, everything else is going to come into play, but it can help in places. Yeah, I don't know. You don't have to go to that extreme, but if you have, like, if your advisors know anybody, like, I would definitely do as much networking as you can and help.
In a sense, networking is part of the job, right? So if you do it well before getting the job, then you'll be better at doing the job as well. So that. Yes, there's some network bias, and people do. You won't be hired just because you're networked. Your file may be looked at twice because you're networked, but not. Right. That won't bring you through, right? So, if you want your work to have impact, you will want to know the people who could read it, and you will make sure you communicate with them, and you give talks and what? Twitter. But same thing as if you have interesting work that you're presenting at conferences and people come and talk to you, well, exchange about it, establish those bonds. You don't have to force it upon them. It should be based in something meaty, right? What you're doing, what you have to offer, your conversations. But if you leverage that to make your network, then it's sensible and it will make you better scientists. You'll be aware of what's happening, people will be aware of what you're doing, and you'll be more engaged in the conversation.
I'm actually serious about Twitter. I mean, I don't know about your field.
I'm not.
But like my field of population genetics and population genomics has a very active Twitter sphere. And it's always about papers, new papers coming out, and wow, check this out and stuff. And so, is that true in your field?
Probably is.
Very boring. Step one.
We have the archive.
You've got the, oh yeah, well there is archive, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Okay, and yes, another question?
Because you mentioned social networking, like Twitter, for example. Is it important to have a personal website, listing your research interests, or some experience, or some blogging?
You have a Google Scholar website, I believe.
I would definitely have Google Scholar.
How about once you've submitted the application, can you get in touch and you don't hear anything back? Is there any way to get back in touch with the committee and say, hey, how's everybody doing? What's up with my application? Or is there no good way to follow up?
I was gonna say, like, especially if you do get like a competing offer, you want to follow up. And,
yeah.
Let them know, like, if there's something like that end comes in for sure.
Yeah, like I've got this offer over here, but I'd really like to have the opportunity to go there. I haven't heard anything. Is that bad news, or is there a chance that I could hear one way or the other?
Has the search been canceled?
Yeah.
It must be, because
All right, well, let's thank our panelists. That was a lot of fun. I think this is the most fun application panel we've had.
Oh, by the way, one quick announcement. Actually, we were chatting about this. In case any of you are interested, I think many of you may know that Duke is starting up an undergraduate program, basically a liberal arts college in Kunshan in China. And definitely there's going to be a call for applications, especially in the sciences and stuff. We need people who are going to be teaching the science. There are no discrete departments within the sciences. It's very interactive and interdisciplinary. So right now we've developed a undergrad curriculum for the first 2 years, and so you don't have a chemistry course, a physics course, a biology course. They're all taught together in themes. So if any of you are in teams of themes, and so check it out if you're at all interested. We need lots of good applications. It's some research and teaching as well. So keep an eye out.
Thank you.